We like beginnings. We like a clean line in the sand where chaos ends and the story becomes understandable. In our own history, that line is often drawn a few thousand years ago when cities rose, writing appeared, and records began to speak back to us. Everything before becomes prehistory, a word that quietly suggests absence, as if nothing complex could have existed without leaving a neat archive. Humanity, in this framing, is not only the inheritor of Earth, but the first true author of advanced civilization on it. According to current evidence, this story is broadly correct in its outline, and yet, when you look closely at the planet's surface, at stone cut with unsettling precision, at structures that seem to defy easy explanation, and at the gaps where time should be, a quieter question starts to press through the certainty. If we are not the first civilization, what happened to the ones before us? The idea is unsettling not because it requires fantasies of impossible beings, but because it asks us to take the Earth seriously as an ancient machine. Our planet is not a static museum. It is active, corrosive, hungry. Water moves, ice advances and retreats. Forests grow over roads in a generation. Coastlines shift, rivers change their minds. The crust itself breaks, folds, and sinks. Given enough time, even the most ambitious human achievements become indistinguishable from geology. If something like a civilization rose long before ours, it would not need to vanish in a dramatic moment to disappear from memory. It would only need to be old. To understand why the question persists, it helps to begin where the ground itself feels least obedient, at the great stone monuments scattered across continents. There are megaliths that sit in plains and deserts, on mountaintops and by seas, as if left behind by different hands yet connected by an instinct that transcended borders. They are heavy beyond the scale of ordinary labor, and in many cases, they are placed with a confidence that implies planning, surveying, and a deep familiarity with materials. Some blocks weigh tens of tons, some weigh far more. They are moved from quarries that can be miles away, sometimes across uneven terrain, and stacked or fitted together so tightly that a blade cannot easily pass between them. Even when the explanation is human effort, the question becomes, what kind of organization, what kind of knowledge, what kind of patience was required? Official archaeology offers answers, and many of them are compelling. People can do astonishing things with ropes, rollers, levers, ramps, and time. Societies can mobilize thousands of workers for decades, driven by religion, power, or survival. Yet in certain places, the scale and precision create a friction that is hard to ignore. It is not the existence of stone structures that troubles the imagination, but the specific details, the angle that repeats as if measured, the surfaces that are inexplicably smooth, the joints that look less like stacked rubble and more like engineered interfaces. Some researchers suggest that we underestimate what ancient people were capable of, and that is a necessary caution. But others argue that we may also be overconfident about what we think we see. If these traces are interpreted differently, the megaliths begin to resemble not isolated miracles, but hints of a lost continuity of technique. Consider precision, not decorative beauty, but functional exactness. In many ancient sites, stone has been cut and shaped with a consistency that seems to demand stable methods, repeated angles, long straight lines, surfaces that meet as if designed to carry load in particular ways. It is easy to imagine one master artisan achieving a perfect cut once. It is harder to imagine an entire project maintaining that standard across hundreds or thousands of stones without tools and measurement systems that can reproduce accuracy. And then there are alignments that appear to reference the sky. Structures positioned toward solstices, cardinal directions, lunar cycles, or specific star risings. Alignments are often disputed. Humans seek patterns, and it is possible to overread coincidence. But according to current evidence, some alignments are intentional, requiring careful observation over long periods and an understanding of geometry and horizon markers. When stone and sky appear to speak to one another, the builders begin to look less like simple laborers and more like disciplined observers. This leads into the next discomforting theme: technologies that do not match their supposed era. Technology here does not need to mean metal machines or modern industry. It can mean methods. It can mean knowledge. A technique can be advanced even when the materials are humble. Precision stone cutting, for example, can be achieved by patient abrasion, by pounding stones, by sand and water used as an invisible blade. The question is not whether it is possible in principle. The question is whether the scale and speed implied by some sites fit the story we tell about their time. When a culture is described as newly settled, newly agricultural, and yet the remains show astonishing engineering coordination, the timeline begins to feel compressed. When tools found at a site seem inadequate to explain the finish on the stone, the gap is filled with assumptions. Perhaps the tools were made of organic materials that did not survive, or perhaps the best tools were taken away, reused, melted, or simply not found yet. These explanations are reasonable, but the tension remains, because our reconstructions often depend on what survives, not on what existed. Perfect alignments add to that tension. To align massive constructions across large distances, or to maintain straight axes through complex layouts, builders need surveying techniques. They need reference lines. They need a way to preserve an intended angle from one season to the next, from one crew to another, from one phase of construction to the next. Some researchers suggest that ancient builders used simple but powerful methods: shadow tracking, sighting poles, water levels, taut cords, and repeated observation. This is entirely plausible, yet it also implies sophistication in organization, in training, and in continuity. A society capable of that is not primitive in any meaningful sense. It is advanced in the only way that matters. It can coordinate minds and materials into durable results. Once you accept that sophistication can exist without modernity, the mind turns naturally to the ground beneath our feet. Because stone can endure, but landscapes do not. Strange geological evidence, unusual erosion patterns, oddly flattened surfaces, and anomalies in sediment can feel like whispers from a lost chapter. In certain places, weathering seems inconsistent with the age assigned to a structure. Elsewhere, rock faces appear eroded in ways that suggest prolonged exposure to water, or cycles of wetness and dryness that do not match the current climate. These interpretations are controversial, and geology is a discipline that punishes sloppy assumptions. Erosion can be deceptive. Wine can mimic water, water can mimic time. Yet the larger point remains: the Earth as surface carries scars and signatures that are easy to misread, and our confidence often depends on incomplete context. If a prior civilization existed, one of the hardest problems would be visibility. Where would its traces be? Our own civilization, for all its concrete and steel, is concentrated in fragile zones, coasts, river plains, deltas, temperate valleys. These are also the most dynamic environments on Earth. Sea levels rise and fall. Storms erode shorelines, rivers bury and reveal. A city built near a coast during a lower sea level could now be submerged, broken apart by waves, and covered by sediment. A city built on a floodplain could be erased by a single catastrophic event, then painted over by thousands of years of new deposits. Some researchers suggest that what we call empty ocean may contain submerged landscapes that were once habitable and inhabited, and that our archaeological focus on dry land leaves much unseen. If these traces are interpreted differently, if we treat the seafloor as a lost continent of evidence, the silence of the record becomes less absolute. This brings us to the idea of missing time. In the archaeological story of humanity, there are stretches where development seems gradual and understandable, and there are moments where something appears to happen suddenly. Farming spreads, cities arise, writing begins. Monumental architecture appears. Often, the mainstream explanation is that the groundwork was laid slowly in ways that left fewer traces, then reached a tipping point where complexity became visible. That is likely true in many cases, but the perception of suddenness still matters because it reveals how dependent we are on what survives. A single discovery can redraw the timeline. A single site, dated earlier than expected, can force uncomfortable revisions. And there are still large gaps, periods where human presence is known, Yet evidence of complex organization is scarce. Scarce does not mean absent. It means we are looking through a narrow window. It is worth remembering that archaeology is not an omniscient scan of the past. It is a disciplined interpretation of fragments. Most organic materials rot, most structures collapse. Most settlements are built over by later ones. Even stone is not safe. It can be quarried, repurposed, buried, cracked by freeze-thaw cycles, ground down by sand, dissolved by rain over geological timescales. Metal corrodes, and in many environments it disappears entirely. The farther back you go, the more the past becomes a statistical problem rather than a complete record. According to current evidence, we can map certain eras with increasing clarity, but we cannot assume that what remains is proportional to what existed. If there were earlier advanced civilizations, their disappearance might not require a single mystery. It might require only time combined with catastrophe. And catastrophe, on Earth, is not a rare exception. It is part of the planet's rhythm. Climate shifts have occurred abruptly in the past. Volcanic events can alter the atmosphere, cool the climate, collapse crops, and poison water sources. Impacts from space, even if uncommon, have left scars across the solar system, and Earth bears its own bruises, sometimes hidden by erosion and tectonics. Oceans can surge inland, ice sheets can melt rapidly. In these events, what matters is not the drama, but the fragility of infrastructure. A complex society depends on stable seasons, predictable rivers, and supply chains. Disrupt those, and complexity can unravel faster than we like to imagine. This is why flood myths matter, even when treated cautiously. Stories of great floods appear in many cultures, separated by oceans and languages. Myth is not a scientific record, and it cannot be read as literal reportage. Yet myth can preserve memory of real experiences, coastal inundations, river catastrophes, tsunamis, or periods of dramatic sea level rise that swallowed lands once lived upon. Some researchers suggest that as the last ice age ended, massive meltwater pulses altered coastlines worldwide, forcing migrations and collapsing coastal communities. If these traces are interpreted differently, if myths are seen as cultural echoes of environmental trauma, then global stories of water may be less about fantasy and more about the human experience of living on a changing planet. Now imagine a civilization advanced in organization, architecture, and knowledge existing before such upheavals. Not modern as we know it, but complex enough to build enduring structures, trade across regions, and map the heavens. Place it in the fertile zones where humans tend to thrive. Then introduce a sequence of destabilizing events, rising seas, changing rainfall patterns, crop failures, migrations, conflict, disease. Add regional disasters, volcanoes, earthquakes, fires. Over a few centuries, the civilization fragments. Knowledge becomes localized, infrastructure decays. People adapt, surviving in smaller groups. Later cultures inherit fragments, ruins to repurpose, myths to tell, alignments to imitate without fully understanding. In this scenario, nothing supernatural is required. Only the standard vulnerabilities of complex life. But even if a civilization collapses, why would almost nothing remain? This is where the Earth's reset system becomes more than a metaphor. Nature reclaims quickly. Within decades, plants pry apart stone, roots invade cracks. Humidity feeds microorganisms that slowly reduce materials. In a century, abandoned wood is gone. In a few centuries, roofs collapse and walls become mounds. In 1,000 years, a city can look like a strange rise in a forest. Over longer spans, rivers erase roads, sediment buries foundations, coastal erosion chews away entire districts. And beyond these processes, there is tectonics, the slow conveyor belt that recycles crust. Subduction zones swallow seafloor and whatever lies upon it. Mountain building deforms layers and breaks continuity. The deeper time becomes, the more the planet behaves like a grinder. Even our own age, with satellites and digital archives, may not leave a clear signature after enough time. Plastic breaks down. Metals corrode, concrete crumbles, glass weathers. The most enduring traces might be subtle, unusual concentrations of certain isotopes, microplastics in sediment layers, or a thin line of industrial ash. If a prior civilization was not industrial in the modern sense, its signature might be even harder to detect. It might leave stone, but stone looks like nature once broken and scattered. It might leave mines, but mines collapse and fill. It might leave agriculture, but soils churn and ecosystems shift. According to current evidence, the deep past is not empty, but it is heavily edited. Still, the core question remains: if civilizations existed before us, what happened to them? One possibility is simple collapse. Civilizations can fall from within: inequality, resource depletion, political fragmentation, and the slow erosion of trust. Another possibility is being wiped out by external forces: climatic upheaval, pandemics, natural disasters. A third possibility is more ambiguous and often misunderstood: abandonment. Not abandonment of the planet in a dramatic sense, but abandonment of a way of life. A society might retreat from cities to smaller, more sustainable communities, leaving monuments behind as relics. In that case, the disappearance is not extinction, it is transformation. The successors might not recognize themselves as inheritors. They might see ruins as sacred, alien, or simply old and build new stories around them. There is also the possibility that the premise is wrong in its strongest form. Perhaps there was no globally advanced civilization before ours, no hidden golden age erased wholesale. Perhaps what we are seeing are peaks of ingenuity within cultures that were otherwise pre-industrial. Perhaps the real mystery is not a lost civilization, but our habit of underestimating ancient minds and overestimating the completeness of our own record. Yet even this more conservative interpretation does not fully dissolve the unsettling implication, because it still means that history is not a straight ladder. It is a landscape with cliffs and valleys, with achievements that can appear and vanish, with knowledge that can be gained and lost, with long stretches of time where the evidence is thin. And that may be the most important conclusion to carry forward: progress may not be linear. We live with an assumption that the future is always more advanced than the past, and that the past is a simple staircase leading to us. But the planet's history suggests something else. Complex systems rise when conditions allow, and they fall when conditions change. The question is not only whether there were civilizations before us, but whether civilization itself is cyclical, repeatedly assembled and dismantled by forces larger than any one generation. If that is true, then we are not the center of the story, we are a chapter. Look again at the megaliths, at the precision that seems too confident for the age assigned to it. Look at the alignments that bind stone to sky. Look at the strange geology that hints at landscapes altered and reworked, at coastlines drowned and forgotten. Look at the gaps in the record, the missing time where we assume absence because we have not yet found presence. According to current evidence, none of this proves a prior civilization beyond dispute. But it does something more subtle and, in a way, more disturbing. It shows how easily certainty is built on silence. If we are not the first civilization, then perhaps what happened to the ones before us is not a single event, but a pattern: rising complexity, followed by stress, followed by collapse, followed by the slow erasure of the evidence. If these traces are interpreted differently, the Earth becomes less like a stage where humanity arrived late and more like a vast archive that has been burned and rewritten many times, with only a few resilient pages surviving the fire. In the end, the question is not meant to convince, it is meant to destabilize complacency. Because even if the past holds no hidden civilizations, the mechanisms that could erase one are real, and they are active today. Floods, droughts, shifts in climate, and the fragility of interconnected systems are not distant possibilities. They are reminders that what we call progress rests on conditions we do not fully control. And so the final image is not of a secret empire buried beneath our feet, but of time itself, patient and indifferent, rolling over everything we build. Somewhere under forests, under deserts, under oceans, there may be traces we have not learned to recognize. Or there may be nothing more than the ordinary footprint of our species, scattered and incomplete. Either way, the unsettling thought remains. If another civilization once believed it was the pinnacle, it may have been wrong. And if civilization is cyclical, then what we call the beginning might only be the latest restart, written on a planet that has erased stories before and will erase again.